What's up, everybody? David here with this week's Griscom stream. Hope you're doing well wherever you are at. I'm not doing so bad myself. I just got back from a pretty fun but long wedding up in St. Louis, so I'm still a little bit out of it, but I want to make sure I was coming back and chatting with y'all because we weren't able to get to it last week. Talking a little bit about this rally with the Amazon Labor Union and Bernie and AOC over the weekend. I bet we'll talk a little bit about this must deal and much more. But more than anything, I want to hear questions from y'all, what's on your mind, and get back into the swing of things. We're going to be joined tomorrow by Luke Savage, Jackman writer, who just came up with a really great book that I've been reading over the weekend, actually called Dead Center. Sort of reckoning and wrestling with the legacy of liberalism. I'm really looking forward to sharing that with y'all. And if you missed it over the weekend, Matt, in my absence, sat down with Brian Box to talk about weed in New York. So don't miss that either. But let's see how everybody's doing. I'll keep an eye on the chat and get started here. Apologies to neighborhoods. They're cutting down a tree next door, so sorry if there's a lot of sound in the background. Let's see. We need to get that Trump audio of Trump talking about the murder and dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi. Just really incredible leaked conversation from Trump where he's like, bad deal. Oh, somebody has it right here. They had a very bad original concept. It was carried out so poorly, and the cover-up was one of the worst in the history of cover-ups. It's very simple. Bad deal. Should have never, ever been thought of. Somebody really messed up. They had one of the worst cover-ups ever. Thanks, Elliot, for taking the trouble to type all that up for us. But yeah, I mean, it was funny. I've been reading this book called Grassroots Socialism, which sort of breaks down sort of some of the Southwestern socialist parties and the history there. And I've been thinking, man, we really needed to be up in our names for these different kind of projects and socialist papers today, because the names of places in the early 20th century were incredible. The paper in St. Louis, the socialist paper there for a while, was called the St. Louis Ripsaw, which is pretty badass. I think a lot better than, I don't know, the Star or, Red Flag or some of the other ones that you see today. Ripsaw, baby. But let's see, y'all. I haven't been keeping up with the NBA playoffs on them, but I don't know. Are you really truly a Nets fan? If so, I'm sorry. But maybe let's should we start with this Bernie Sanders and AOC rally before we get into some of the other things? Over the weekend, there was another big rally as they're trying to unionize their second shop, all the wonderful people at the Amazon Labor Union. And, a lot of people, we talked about this on the program. We had Elias on the program last week to talk about it a little bit as well. A lot of people, had a hard time sort of reckoning and wrestling with what Chris Small's comments after, the first victory at the Staten Island facility meant for the left and AOC and the relationship with them. And, on this program, Matt and I were making the point that, Chris can call out whoever he wants. And if you're serious about this movement, you should be able to listen to these things instead of filtering everything that you hear into some kind of media narrative. And there were people who were twisting themselves up into pretzels, acting as if AOC not attending some of the earlier rallies was some kind of three-dimensional chess. If she would have went, she would have become a target and would have been a problem. So she was actually making a sacrifice by not going. That was bullshit and cope. But as we know during the show, while Chris was rightfully, making some criticisms and points about, politicians sort of not showing up as much as they could for this movement, he said the quote, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And there's plenty of times for people to show up. And they did. So, if you're one of those kind of, weird people who is extremely AOC obsessed and thinks that she's sort of the cause of everything bad or unfortunate that happens to the left, you were definitely wrong. And also, if you're one of these people who refuses to engage with any kind of criticism, no matter how constructive or fair it is, of people like that, you're wrong too. And I don't want to focus too much on that, but that was a little bit of interesting discourse that I think showed a lot of people are thinking about these things in strange ways. But let's focus on the real stuff, though, which was this second rally here, this big rally over the weekend. Um, because it's truly exciting. And it's the kind of politics that we desperately need to be seeing a lot more of. I think Eric Blanc has a really great piece, sort of covering not just the event itself, but what it means strategically, and sort of thinking about how we were going to build and create a stronger labor movement. You can read it in Jackman. I'll just go through a couple seconds of it here and see what y'all are saying in the chat. Amazon workers are organizing and elected officials are supporting them. About Eric Blanc, a reborn workers movement needs both organized workplace militancy and left-wing politicians that back them. Sunday's Staten Island Amazon rallies, attended by Bernie Sanders, AOC, and other elected officials, featured both. They are noting, Eric's noting here, this is a month after the really exciting victory in the first Amazon facility to unionize in the U.S. But he notes that there's a lot of similarities here between the kind of feeling with that really famous Bernie Sanders rally in his 2020 campaign in Queens when AOC sort of showed up. It was after I believe the losses, the sort of struggles in Nevada, and people were worried that the campaign was sort of not as inspiring as it had been in the first go of it. And AOC and a bunch of other progressives showed up and endorsed him. Thousands upon thousands of people were there. I wasn't there, but I know Michael Brooks was there. Really invigorated the campaign, and sort of noting that this had like a very similar feel, which is a pretty good kind of thing. I mean, you want to be motivating people as much as possible. Sanders laid out the national stakes of the ALU's victory. You have been an inspiration for millions of workers all across this country because they have looked at you and they've said, these guys in Staten Island, New York, stood up to an extraordinarily powerful corporation. If they can do it in Staten Island, we can do it throughout this country. And I think that that's like an extremely, an extremely important point. We get a lot of people who reach out to this program, just talking to people anecdotally who, they say, well, I want to pursue this, or I want to try to convince people to join me in maybe trying to organize a union in my workplace, or maybe some kind of radical action to improve our conditions. Like, well, how can we convince people? And I say, like, well, we can have all the rhetoric that we want, but eventually you're also going to have to be able to point to stuff that is working for people. And having these kind of victories, both in Amazon and also in with all these Starbucks unions, I think is an incredible resource for us to say, is like, look, we noted this one thing that we love so much about Chris Smalls and the other organizers out of the Staten Island facility is that they were saying, like, we're just regular guys. And obviously, what they've done is absolutely commendable, and they have insights that are extremely useful. But that phrasing isn't like undermining all the incredible work that they're doing. Rather, it's saying that, like, we can all learn and educate each other the best way, to achieve victory. And it's not easy. And it takes a lot of commitment and a lot of seriousness to be able to do this kind of thing. Plenty of people have failed to do this in the past. But also, at the end of the day, it's one of those things that is just is actually achievable. Um, if you really have the commitment to build with your coworkers, and the tenacity to not give up, and to sort of say, yeah, maybe you guys think I'm crazy, maybe you think this won't work, but I'm going to try anyway, and I'm going to try as hard as I can. And anyways, being able to point like things like that, I think has been something that's been extremely beneficial. So I have I think that's really worthwhile. And let's see if I'm able to pull this video up real quick. Because I mean, if you haven't seen some of the videos from the rally, I highly suggest checking them out. But let me, I just want to make sure I'm getting everybody's name right here. Hold on one second. Here we go. This is Derek Palmer. This is courtesy of Eric Blanc's Twitter account. Derek Palmer talking about Bernie and AOC, and I just think, like, just going back to what I was just saying, I think this really sort of embodies and shows why this has been such an important moment, and also why, like, building up these kind of communities that are deeply rooted. Um, in labor and working class communities, and also bridging them with the kind of political arena can be really beneficial for us. But let's just watch this, like, just 10 seconds. But this is again Palmer of the Derek Palmer of the Amazon Labor Union talking about Bernie and the gang.
Throughout these years, and I'm glad that it's finally back. Shout out to Bernie Sanders, man. You're a legend, bro. Seriously. Shout out to AOC. Thank you. Shout out to the community. We did this shit. Workers did this.
And it's just like, again, I know that sometimes these can seem like little simple points, but, a lot of times folks really try to over intellectualize these things. And I think, I've called it before, like, left pessimism, but, like, one thing that I think, like, if you're from working class communities versus like a lot of socialists who sort of, like, they talk about them in the abstract, you'll know what I'm talking about here, where there is a kind of general pessimism in the sense of, well, that sounds great, and that this sounds great, but I don't think it can happen. I don't really believe in the capacity for political action. I don't believe in the capacity for political change. And again, you can't blame people for that if you've lived in the United States, as I have, your entire life. You've only seen that usually when politics and these kind of changes come into your community, even if they might be exciting at first, they usually mean something bad's around the corner. And a lot of times people on the left, they sort of think about politics as a puzzle to be sort of solved with, like, the right answer to the question. Um, you know, I read a lot. I like philosophy, and I don't think that that's unimportant. Don't misunderstand me here. But a lot of people think that, like, the reason we don't have a strong working movement is because of we haven't had the right pitch yet. And again, that's certainly an important part of the game, but it's also building up the confidence that is something that is so crucial for being able to have momentum, to be able to take on these long and prolonged fights that are ahead of us. And just hearing the enthusiasm at that rally, and the belief too, it's like, it wasn't from up high that these things were delivered. It was us, as Derek Palmer is saying, like, we did this. And I think it's a really beautiful thing, and I hope that we can continue to celebrate success after success going forward. But let's see what y'all are saying in the chat. I want to make sure that we're not getting too far ahead of each other. um, I'm on Net's chat. Sorry. um, Joe Snuffy, I appreciate the chat. Says, "Hey Dave, did you get a chance to read the article I sent you about how wage theft is only a misdemeanor in Rhode Island? At least our attorney general is trying to fix it." And no, I haven't. I've been out of town for the past few days. I literally just got in this morning. But oh, you have a follow up here. Talking about the AG in Rhode Island, he's still finding ways to prosecute offenders, but in a high-profile case, the employer being charged with $93,000 of wage theft faces stiffer charges for committed $1,000 in fraud. I mean, there's no doubt about it, and I'm not alone in this, and you're not alone in making this point that wage theft across the board is probably one of the largest criminal activities that's going on a daily basis in the United States, and it's completely under prosecuted. And we all know why. It's because we're talking about powerful people, rich people not paying normal people. What interest does the state have to do in disciplining the rich and powerful in the society? In fact, like, the system's set up to protect them. But I mean, the numbers, when you really start to look at the amount of uncompensated labor that we all sort of have to endure, is absolutely insane. And it gets even worse, when you have kind of unique pay systems. Obviously, the easiest example is tip workers. I mean, hell, when I was working for tips, I was very, and this is not obviously, you can't do this everywhere, but I was never very big on trying to do any kind of work other than the work that I was getting a tipped wage for. Like the cleaning work that they try to make you to do. There's limits on that in a lot of states because it's insane, right? You can't have somebody come in 4 hours before a restaurant opens to clean the restaurant, for $2 or whatever it is an hour. And say, well, you get paid tips. Well, you're not getting paid tips for that work that you're doing there. Um, and it would be illegal for them to hire somebody $2 an hour to clean the restaurant. So they're basically using that workforce as well, basically to undercut the potential wages of other people who get paid to clean up, during work time. Anyway, I mean, I think that's being more serious about prosecuting wage theft is something that is like that's even on the progressive horizon. So if you can find ways to push for prosecuting that, I think it makes sense to most people. It's a worthwhile thing to do. But no, I'll check out the piece later, Jim. All right. Josh has a good question here. How do you feel when people on the left categorize their politics in quite specific and very theoretical ways? In essence, I'm an anarcho-vegan sandcarist tendency. Yeah, I mean, I think that stuff. I mean, this is just my opinion. Like, this is not the biggest problem that we have, but I think it reveals a kind of problem that exists with a lot of people on the American left. And I'll just say, like, this was important to me maybe before, so like, I became a leftist, a little bit before Occupy. And then I went through Occupy, and then Occupy lasted for a little while, and I was very involved. It was exciting. And then it fizzled out. And then you're just sort of like in the world, right? And you think about politics a certain way, but you don't find any kind of avenue for them. So the way that you reflected and felt about things starts to become really important to you. Like, the people who feel a real serious need to like identify as a very particular like tendency in history, I think it's more psychoanalytic than political, right? It's like, oh, this is an expression of how how I want other people to know how I feel about these kind of events or this kind of activity that's happening politically, right? And again, like, we're in our heads all the time. I get it. But it's not politics. And I think it shows that like there is such a hyper like individualism in like our culture in this country. And I know it's not unique to America, but this is, I think, a very, very like American online kind of things to say, like, I'm going to express to the world my politics, and it doesn't matter what I'm doing or what's happening around me. I can like rest easy at night knowing that I've like got these things figured out, right? When at the end of the day, it's like that just isn't politics. It's not in a materialist way. That's an idealist kind of politics where, you know, as if like God is watching you and it's like, oh, thank you for, staying to the true doctrine. Where it's like, this isn't like an argument for like revisionism or like eclecticism or anything like that. I think it's worthwhile to think about questions. I mean, like, what do you want? How would you like the state to be organized? How do you want production to be organized? Do you want like a kind of system of a bunch of isolated co-ops, or do you want like big, powerful, beautiful industry that is run and controlled by workers, right? Like, those are serious questions. They're not right in front of us, but I think dealing with those and thinking about them is absolutely crucial. But if you're not engaging in any kind of political activity that would even make what you're getting worked up about, viable or worthwhile, then like this is a personal individual exercise. And far be it from myself to tell people how to deal with their kind of internal mind palaces. But I've never really thought that been particularly interested in like sort of spending a lot of time if like you only have the perfect categorization for like how you feel and view the world, that you've brought yourself any closer um to doing. I mean, I think you're much more um you'll be much better suited to be spending the time that you're sort of like trying to search for like this personal name that you're going to call yourself, to be spending that time, reading a little bit of history, and kind of general economics. than like finding really, really particular inter-Marxist like intellectual squabbles. But that's just me. And also, I think like once you start adding like more than one hyphen in your thing, too, it gets pretty ridiculous. Um, I'm following these down as we went down. Well, Newer Yank says, "How do you feel about DSA and so-called progressive Democrats abandoning BDS in the Palestinian cause?" Well, regarding DSA, that'd be news to me. I don't know what progressive Democrats you're talking about, though I did see Turner was. But like, look, this is what I've said this about Turner for a long time. I think that she's great on a lot of ways, but she very clearly isn't a socialist. And like, you're exposed in in this kind of movement. That means we have like pretty severe and significant disagreements on these things. I think that like if you can be selecting somebody like that over maybe a more typical Democratic Party member, that might be worthwhile. But I don't think about myself, I guess, personally as like a member of like a progressive movement writ large. I think of myself as a member of the socialist movement. So my relationship with a lot of the other things is less so. I think whatever you're going on about DSA, I mean, we've talked a lot about Bowman, we've talked a lot about AOC, we've talked a lot about things that have gone on with different caucuses in the organization. I think a lot of people on the outside are trying to make a lot of hay about things that they don't understand. Because if you think that anybody has been turning their back on this movement, you're full of shit. Literally, like a once in a lifetime candidate here in Austin, somebody who's developed within the organization, somebody who I think will be a phenomenal congressperson, Greg Kassar, was unendorsed by the Austin DSA chapter because of their position on BDS and on Palestine. Right, everything else was great because of that. Somebody who would be a flag bearer for the organization, somebody who was important strategically and for recruitment and all that kind of stuff. People moved on from that. So I have a little bit of a hard time with people who have like sat on the sidelines of politics, who again like aren't actively engaged in many things. Misunderstanding a fight that is very clear, that is happening within the organization, that people from the outside get a little glimpse in of, and they don't understand very closely, going on about, the organization turning its back on BDS, because frankly, that's bullshit. The reason that there is so much stuff that people are catching from the outside is because people are taking that commitment so seriously, that it's causing organizational fights about how we produce and move forward, and continue this movement, right? I don't have too much patience for that kind of framing of it anymore. All right. Are we waiting for the next Twitter-like social media to deactivate our Twitter accounts? The picture was showing up for me, I think, was a photograph of a short-haired Matt Leck, but I wasn't 100% sure. It doesn't show up on the screen for everybody else. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I want to talk about the Musk thing in a minute because it's pretty funny, but I was just trying to catch up on questions. But no, I mean, I don't think sequestering ourselves onto little fragments of the internet is worthwhile. I think getting worked up about Twitter too much um, is silly. But it's a public square. People get involved. People get engaged, and you want to be where the people are generally. I've never felt like fragmenting these things is helpful. I think this is like why you want to get involved in mass politics and mass media, if you're a socialist too. Hmm. And again, I'm just going to respond to this because some people are watching this and they might not familiar with this. This is what happens when you don't know what's happening within the organization. The BDS Working Group, again, you can feel one way or another about this moment. The BDS Working Group, the commitment to BDS is in the organization now officially. The BDS Working Group was moved into the international committee, which again, if you follow this organization, literally is the group that the kind of, I don't know, the more social democratic side of politics is of like DSA is the most upset with the international committee, right? So BDS is being, brought into a committee that I think most people would consider to be one of the most anti-imperialist, critics of American, um, of American empire, and certainly no friends of the apartheid project in Israel. The BDS Working Group gets brought into that group because there were a lot of serious questions about whether or not a working group, which has relationships to everybody, but it is not necessarily something that is like voted on a national level or something like that, should be able to hold up their own media apparatus, and wondering if they were using that in coordination with the interests of the vast majority of people within the organization, right? Again, that was a big fight. You can feel one way or another about it, but it was not a rejection of BDS and Palestine politics. It was a struggle between different groups within the organization, who have different feelings about how they think that these groups, these like working groups and things like that, should be interacting with internal membership, internal members, and external members. Again, you could feel strongly about that one way or another, but this kind of like bullshit story that you're getting from people, again, like from the far outside, is not reflective of the reality. It's not like there was an order to stop doing BDS activism within the organization. It was saying, instead of having this working group that is specifically focused on one issue in our international perspective, they will be moved into another group, which again, if you're worried about the factions within the organization, the international committee is not particularly a part of the DSA's organization that is like reflective of, I mean, it is one of the most anti-imperialist, anti-apartheid parts of the organization itself, right? It's just BS to sit here and say that everybody, oh well, look, this thing happened. And it's like a lot of people who are on the outside really rely on folks' sort of ignorance of what's happening internally in the organization, to sort of tell these stories. Again, I'm not saying that you have to agree with that, or that there's not questions or or fights or all those other kind of things that happen within a democratic organization like that. But this really kind of stupid surface level storytelling, I think, is extremely unhelpful. It has been for a long ass time. Um, so I'm just coming down for you. I hope I'm not missing anything. I'm sorry if I am. All right. All right. Well, let's see what we can do. Yeah, I mean, send it their way. I mean, I've been supporting the Palestinian people since I was extremely young. That's how I got involved in left wing organizing, and I think that BDS is really fucking important. And I think that instead of letting random ass people use it to try to cull and pull people outside of organizations that have the potential and capacity, to build serious responses to American empire, I have no patience for people trying to use Palestine cynically like that. Yeah, I mean, send it their way. I'm their friend. But let's see. If we don't have any, oh, we have Luke here. Says the analytical Marxists like Eric Olin Wright and G.A. Cohen rejected the concepts of dialectics as bullshit. Do we need dialectics? Let's see. I mean, I'm not from the same tradition as Olin Wright and G.A. Cohen. I think Ben Burgess, just put out a big piece on that because that's his main thing. Kind of more analytic philosophy. I've always found dialectics to be a very helpful concept. I think that understanding that there are different, for example, like parts of a whole can be really helpful in understanding and sort of being able to work within contradiction, that things aren't always sort of, one essence or another essence. But that there's tension within, different concepts, I think can be very, very helpful. Um, but I have to say off the top of my head, I'm not familiar with the Owen Wright's or Cohen's sort of rejection of him. So I'd have to spend some time reading up on that to be able to respond. All right. Well, I mean, newer Yankal will say, I appreciate the questions too, and I'm not accusing you of this kind of stuff, but I just there are a lot of people who I was very friendly with for a long time on the left, and maybe I'm getting sidetracked here, but you know, I'm not, I'm not that old, but I've been a socialist in a time when there wasn't a kind of arena for fights to be happening, for movements being built, and um, I've seen both sides of it, if you get what I mean. Sort of thinking about politics from like the outside looking in, right? It's like, oh, if only we had some kind of socialist organization, if only we had some capacity for these fights to sort of mean something materially, rather than just different kind of like friend groups going back and forth. Um, I lived through that period of time. Before Bernie Sanders, before like TSA sort of grew up in membership, and I see people who I knew back from that old world sort of sitting on the sidelines as like new movements are being built up, and criticizing a lot from the outside, and not really knowing what's going on internally in organizations. And it's like going back to the BDS stuff. It's like it's not like as if these things are going on without controversy, but I get frustrated because a lot of folks totally from the outside of these organizations have been very, very willing to like paint pretty wild pictures of what's going on, internally. And one, I think it's extremely unhelpful. But I think more than that, it's just been sort of difficult and sad for me to see friends and comrades of mine, who very happy to show up to like a march for something, but not wanting to do the kind of actual like internal work of being a part of a movement as like a member of an organization, always sort of privileging themselves as individuals over all of that, and as critics from the outside. And I don't know, it's a little frustrating for me on a personal level, but I've seen that for I've just seen that from a lot of people who were sort of doing writing for different publications before, for example, things like Jacobin, or like this kind of larger media world that we have when it was a lot more tiny and insular, not being able to come into the next bit of history. Um, all right. Yeah, I guess KG sort of is sitting in here, but they're not really saying um, too much other than saying, "Oh, you can't." Oh, David is saying, "Don't let them criticize us." Yeah. No, I think that it's not helpful if you're not operating from, the full picture of what's going on within organizations. If you don't understand what's at stake, what these fights are actually about. No, I think a lot of the commentary I see from groups like that is bullshit. Sorry, that's just how it is. If you're ignorant of something, you're probably not going to have the best perspective on it. And yeah, let's see. This is a question here. How do we avoid political and financial corruption from the leadership of our own organizations? We just saw Patrice Cullors and company completely screw over Black Lives Matter with little consequence or accountability. Well, say, I hear you there for sure. Those are like different groups, for example, than an organization like DSA. And I think that what you saw with, the Black Lives Matter stuff, I think it says a lot more about the NGO kind of social activist world than what like a socialist, or the kind of challenges the socialist organization faces. Um, but how can you create safeguards around that? I mean, I think finding ways. I mean, there's kind of basic like organizational stuff that's sort of like neutral science, if you get what I mean. Like, how do you set up an organization that has like money coming in and out of it without letting people at the top sort of grift off of it? There's a kind of like management science to that, that I'm not necessarily an expert in. But one thing that we have been talking about, that I think is really important, is creating a situation where leadership is answerable to membership, and ways that you do that is not necessarily just in Q&A stuff, but it's in like direct knowledge sharing, and this is useful for a lot of different things, but it's when you are in leadership of an organization, or if you're somebody who is in Congress, you are experiencing politics in the organization on a different level, right? The way that you think about what you're doing is different than the kind of just a rank and file member, and with that you gain a certain kind of skill and insight. And one thing that is, this is going back, we've been talking about this a lot, and we might just need to do an episode on it because I guess it's been on our mind through all these questions. But there's this, theory called the iron law of oligarchy, which sort of goes through like, why do so many social democratic parties, end up, becoming reformist, even if their history is like quite radical. And it's an iron law, right? Which means it's like, well, this is just what happens. And there's some good criticism of whether or not it's an iron law, but one of the ways that this ends up happening is cordoning off like knowledge, right? Access to information. So the easiest one thing about it is like a politician, gets elected into the halls of power, and they're able to, one, they're representing a kind of workers movement or whatever, but they're also sort of seeing how the system works internally. And they understand where the power is at. They understand how decisions are really made, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a fear there that, like, if they start to share that information with everybody else, then, well, what really makes them different from any other kind of like rank and file member? They sort of like the life that they're living now. They don't want to have to go back to just being a regular rank and file person. So they're, more often than not, there's a kind of shutdown of that knowledge, and a lot of work to sort of obscure what's going on. You know, in Congress or in Parliament or wherever they're at, right? And so instead of providing that kind of knowledge and information and practical lessons that you're getting, there's a cutoff there. And I think a way to avoid that, we should be aiming to end that kind of practice, and to say that, like, we really want a lot more knowledge sharing from our elected officials. But I also think finding ways with like leadership of organizations to do that is very helpful, because it helps give us a kind of insight as to what is being done. So in addition to like the kind of basic stuff about like making sure that having pretty rigorous accounting and things like that, that again, that's just like the kind of science of management of money. um I think that's important, and like that's the big thing with a lot of these NGOs, is that they cordon off people in a different area so that it's easy to sort of siphon money off at the top. But again, I don't think that we're in a position, or frankly, have the budget right now to be worried about that with our kind of lefty organizations. But I think if you're worried about organizations becoming top down and what that can lead to, taking very seriously that knowledge sharing question is important. Um, all right, here we go. I'm trying to get involved somewhere. DSA was an option, but the Adolf Reed issue and the BDS. Are you in New York? I'm assuming you're in New York, right? Um, I just say, from my friends who are in that organization are pretty big Adolf Reed fans, and I don't think that was a kind of universal position when he was effectively uninvited. And if that was something that was upsetting to you, I think even more reason to be a member and to not be silent these things, because I thought that was a travesty too when they uninvited Adolf Reed of all freaking people. But again, like the people who I know who are most active in those organizations are big Adolf Reed fans. But do what works best for you, of course, friend. Let's see. I'm just going down. I don't know. Nothing to see here as a question about the Whig Party. I don't know that off the top of my head, but um, check it out and let us know. Jules, what's your take that Bernie might run again? We talked about last week, Matt, and I mean, like, I'll strap in for another round. I mean, I think it stomps, sort of blocks a really stupid um, tendency on the U.S. left that we're going to find some kind of progressive champion who I'm worried is going to be somebody like Ro Khanna, the progressive capitalist, who will just completely, deflate, this kind of Bernie movement, I think, into absurdity if that's the case. So, like, if Bernie can run again, even if it's not successful, and sort of block fragmentation of a bunch of like Jai Paul, Ro Khanna, who knows who else, trying to come in and sort of fragment off like the people who were first brought into the Bernie Sanders movement in the first place. I think that'd be that's worthwhile in itself. But I mean, I'm ready for it. He's sharp. He's still the guy. But beyond all of this, I mean, all it's shown, as we've talked about Bernie 2020, Bernie 2016, is that like the real work needs to be building up a movement that has the capacity not just to win elections, but to challenge like the internal state apparatus that will be completely hostile to any kind of, for example, Bernie Sanders style politics internally. And um, I think that's first and foremost the main thing that we should be thinking about, regardless of if Bernie's running a 24 or not. But again, it's nice. I mean, we all like the man. So I'll happily do it again. I'm not too optimistic about necessarily what that outcome would be, which is why I'm saying that. Like, I think the calculus still is the same. It's like the number one task right now has to be building up, independent socialist movement in this country, and not relying so much on internal fights within the Democratic Party. Um, all right, let's see. I mean, I don't know if I wouldn't be too stoked on an AOC 24. I mean, or like AOC presidential run in general, until I see her a little bit more deeply reflecting a kind of socialist politics or thinking. But I'm uh, I'm uh, I'm happy to be surprised, right? I mean, I think that like at least every DSA group that I've been in or seen, there is a lot of tension from a lot of people who are coming out of liberalism and bring their old kind of habits and way of thinking into their ostensibly like socialist politics. And I've always just felt that having patience and trying to do the work of educating and fighting internally is really is really crucial because it's like no, there's no doubt about these things are imperfect. I mean, Adolf Reed is like really one of the people who's as good as it gets, not just for the analysis that I think gets him very famous today, but this is somebody who has a deep understanding of politics in this country and ways to build some kind of form of an American Workers' Party. If we're ever going to have it, it will have to flow through a lot of the teachings that Adolf Reed has given us. And I remember totally being there with Michael when, uh, you know, people were getting worked up about the idea of Adolf Reed speaking, and there's a whole controversy that eventually just let him, got him to the point where it's like, well, I'm just not going to go through with this bullshit. And that was a really, really sad event. At least for me, I've just never felt seeing something like that is a reason to to stop fighting or to stop letting these movements grow. Um, or like participating in movements that are very clearly growing, because the alternative is sitting on the outside of being right, versus being within an organization and fighting for these things. And I will say, ever since that moment, um, the Bernie thing, I've the Adolf Reed thing, I've only seen people who take seriously ideas like what Adolf Reed is talking about grow in kind of power and numbers within the organization, rather than it being a kind of retreat into a very particular style of hyper identitarian like liberalism. But again, like chapter by chapter, it's very different. I mean, I've been seeing some strange things, I think, out of the Baltimore chapter internally. But I don't know. I don't want this to be an internal like DSA politics podcast, but I guess that's been the theme for today. But as you've seen, from what I've seen over the past few years, um, has actually been a move more in the direction of a material analysis of politics rather than an idealist analysis of politics. And had it been the other way around, right, then I would be worried. And I wouldn't be as adamant about joining up these kind of groups. But all I've seen is as people learn these lessons, as people become more and more familiar, because like for fuck's sake, I'm sorry, a lot of people have high expectations for folks who 4 or 5 years ago probably consider themselves to be liberals. There's a lot of unwinding that has to happen in political analysis over that period of time. So again, what Lisa's saying here is totally makes sense to me on an individual level, right? In Massachusetts, you know, they don't want to be in a hub of folks who are going to be, anti-working class. Sorry, they live in a hub where of colleges and universities, and they're worried that people in the organization are going to be more reflective of that group. And I understand that completely. But what I'm trying to say is that all I've seen is that there's been a concerted effort of people to try to shift and change the direction. It's not a one for one. Um, and it's happening, and you can sit out, and that's fine. You can sit out and be right, or you can find a place where your politics matter, in the sense that like there are internal fights that are happening, and there's education that needs to be done, and there's a place where where these things have a material impact, versus again sitting on the outside, and not having a place for your kind of voice or perspective to really, really matter in a way that's sort of directing the largest, socialist organization in this country. Um, but that's just how I feel about it. Jules is hoping Twitter goes up in flames. Does AOC own a Tesla? I did not know that. That's pretty good. Lord. Um, let's see. No, I appreciate your question, Lisa. Or is it Lisa Liza? Um, Feeling new to this, intimidated. I got you. I mean, that's we all, that's a normal kind of thing to feel. All right. We got some blood money coming from Nebraska. Thanks so much, Kowalski. Prairie Fire. If you need a little antidote, the thing about politics all the time, check out Prairie Fire's farm viz. They're really awesome. And also make sure that you check out our. I guess we need to get you back on soon to do our spring or summer update, farm report, agriculture report. We did that. We released that on Left Reckoning. If you want to hear Kowalski on there, that's a lot of fun. We'll see. All right. I think we've sort of come to an end here. Tomorrow, Matt and I are going to be talking with Luke Savage. We're going to be talking about his new book, Dead Center. I think we didn't get to it today. I want to break down some of this Musk deal because the Twitter stuff, I think we've all talked about what it might mean and how to feel about that however you will. But the way he is doing this is actually very funny. And the way he's trying to pay for this and actually might be a really big disaster. So we'll talk about that and a few other things. So make sure that you check out the show tomorrow at 7 Central. We'll see y'all this weekend. And take care, everybody.